This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles. I know my guy Greg, straight back from Florida, the sun, the warm weather. Maybe he got a little bit of a tan, I don't know. But, of course, there was a lot said, Greg, down south. Thanks to Robert Kraft, thanks to Bill Belichick. Let's start with the owner. Your reaction to Kraft's comments talking about no playoff wins in 3 years, setting some expectations for this team. What did you think the owner was trying to do with his comments?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting, Nick. And I'll just start off by saying that Robert Kraft's on-the-record comments were not the only sort of information that we gleaned about the Patriots and sort of how they feel about how the ownership feels about it or the organization feels about where the team is right now. So I just want to sort of say that at the outset because I may say some things, may allude to some things that people are like, well, Robert didn't say that or what have you. What people need to understand is that, look, this is the first league meeting in really 2 or 3 years. And, these league meetings are good because you get face-to-face with the power brokers around the league that many of us have known. I've been covering the league for 2 decades. So there's a lot of people inside and outside the organization that I've known for a very long time that I haven't really seen face-to-face. So it's been harder to get information that we normally would have had before. I feel much better about that the information gaps are sort of filled now on what I know about the team or how the league perceives the team. So I just wanted to say that up front. I thought in terms of Robert's comments, I was definitely surprised that he came, and it was no mistake. It was by design that he came out of the box without taking a question and talked about not making no playoff wins in 3 years, drafting again for the second straight year. He hit on it, and his belief that you have to draft well. I mean, for him to say, we drafted well last year, but the previous 4 drafts weren't any good. I was definitely surprised by that, and I think that gives you some indication of where how ownership feels. I do think that that Robert likes to align himself with the fans, and but I will say this: I didn't take Robert's on the record comments as really putting Belichick on the spot, really putting pressure on Bill. Now, I will say that the information I have is that, look, Kraft and ownership sees where the team is, has seen what Bill has done this offseason, the lack of activity, and also what he's done with the coaching staff, personnel, who he's promoted, who he hasn't, and they have many of the same questions that we have. The same questions that we've been asking on this podcast about what's going on with this team. Right. Why are they doing X, Y, and Z? I think that ownership has the same questions. They are giving Bill a wide berth this year. They're like, okay. Basically, they're like, okay, I don't understand why you're doing any of this, and it doesn't look good, but you have certainly earned the right to do this. However, if it doesn't work, and if the Patriots don't make the playoffs, if they regress, then I think this is setting up for Robert, at the very least, to ask some very serious questions after this season, and perhaps for him to flex his muscle more on the football side if things don't go well this season.
Interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Kraft does do just that and start flexing the muscle if the season doesn't go as well as he wants it to go. I know some people tried to lead into his comments and say, oh, well, Bill, is he on the hot seat? Everybody relax with that. Bill Belichick is not on the hot seat. They did win 10 games last year. They got to the playoffs. The season did not end the way that any of us wanted it to end. We talked about it when it happened, when they got absolutely stomped by the Bills. But you're not gonna put the greatest coach of all time after a double-digit win season getting to the playoffs. You're not going to put him on the hot seat the next year. It's just unrealistic. That's not what Kraft was doing. I think Kraft was, in his own way, he was sending a signal to Belichick. And I agree with you, Greg, where it's, hey, look, I'm paying attention. I'm not sitting back here. I'm not resting on my laurels. I'm not, the older owner who's won 6 Super Bowls going to kick my feet up and have some drinks and not worry about things. I want to win. And we can't look, too far past the ages of both guys. Honestly, when we have this conversation, Belichick's going to be 70, Kraft is in his late 70s. Both guys are highly competitive. I don't think that Belichick necessarily needs a kick in the pants. Belichick wants to win. We all know that. And Belichick understands that he's going to be 70 as well as anybody else knows he's going to be 70. But I do think every once in a while, as the owner, as the person up top, you've got to make sure that everybody is doing their best job and that they understand what the expectations are. And you set the goals, you set the tone. I think that's what Kraft did. And I don't think it's, hey, we're going to fire you if we don't make a deep run this year. It's just we got to continue to check these boxes, Bill, and make sure that we're progressing in the right direction. Because if we're not, then, yeah, I'm going to have to really start to butt in. And maybe I won't be Jerry Jones and be insufferable, but I will make sure that my voice is heard a little bit more in these meetings. And I will be looking at the future of this organization and understanding that you might not be a part of it.
I completely agree with you, Nick. And a couple more things along those lines. What's interesting to me, and we won't see it, it probably won't manifest itself, but, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And trust me, Belichick and his people saw Robert's comments, heard Robert's comments. And they probably weren't thrilled about it. Bill's sort of, used to, and he has certainly earned it many times over to sort of have hands off, leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. I've won you 6 Super Bowl titles, that sort of thing. Robert sort of doubling down on the draft was interesting. I mean, I think they look at, I will say this, one thing that from talking to people at the NFL owners meetings, because, and there are questions, like I said, there are questions from ownership about what they've done, specifically about, Matt Patricia and his role, Joe Judge, lack of a real offensive coordinator, or at least experienced offensive coordinator. For Mac Jones, who is going into his second year. Robert talked about that, how, there's a year 2 jump for these guys. They expect to see it. If it doesn't happen, they're probably going to blame the coaching changes on that. And Bill's, not bringing in Bill O'Brien or Adam Gase or somebody like that. So it'll be interesting to see how Belichick and his people sort of react to what Kraft did. But I do think that Kraft wants to keep the pressure on. I think at least he feels, and I'm not saying this is reality, I think that he feels that his comments last year about where the team was in the draft and having to spend $230 million all because of poor drafting, I think, and then all of a sudden them coming up with their best draft in years, I think that Kraft feels a little bit emboldened by that he thinks that the pressure, the sort of the under the table pressure that he put resulted in changes. And I think he's doubling down on that. And, I think that, they're watching, like you said, they're not putting him on notice, but and I don't think that even if they go in the tank this year for some reason, if they have a losing record, I don't think Belichick's job's in jeopardy. But I do think that the Krafts could step in and say, all right, well, you need to bring in a real offensive coordinator, real quarterback guy. They understand. Look, Bill has not had the best track record in terms of bringing in coaches sort of mid-career or where they've been someplace else, even if, say, a Brett Bielema, somebody like that. Bill hasn't had the best success with those guys, and he's better with younger people and people who have been here. So like a Nick Caley, they understand that Bill has a better hit record promoting from within, going with younger guys, and training them on the fly than he does older guys, but they want to see the results, and we'll have to see how that goes.
It's an interesting conversation because when you look at, first of all, I think they understand that Belichick, they're giving him some slack in the rope, and they should, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the guy's done what he's done. So we agree on all of that. The coaching part of this is fascinating because, a lot of people think about Belichick and they think about his coaching staff and they think about his underlings, and they tend to think about the Belichick coaching tree and what these guys have been in other places. But I think you bring up a great point, Greg. Belichick has a long track record of cultivating coaches underneath him that are good and that truly understand it. And whether it's, they just missed the details, the minutia that Belichick understands, whether it's, they don't understand clock management and personnel, there's a lot of different things that go into it, right? Like McDaniels, when he went to Denver, he failed. He was 32 years old, 33 years old. He was given the ultimate power in the organization. He made a bunch of moves that made no sense, like drafting Tebow in the first round, and he rubbed people the wrong way. He didn't know, people's skills. Maybe that'll be different with the Raiders now moving forward. Patricia was kind of the same way, right? Patricia went to Detroit, smart guy, good coach, but he rubbed people the wrong way, didn't have great people skills, came across as too much of a Belichick clone. But when you look at what Belichick does with these guys when they're on his staff, he has a good track record. I mean, he has developed some really good coaches. So I'm not going to write off Nick Caley. Do I wish they had somebody who was more experienced? I think it would make me feel more comfortable because Mac Jones is going into his second year. But Belichick, who was sitting there talking about Josh McDaniels being one of the best, offensive coordinators when he was first given the duty of calling plays? So I'm not going to sit there and say, because I don't know Nick Caley from a hole in the wall, I'm not going to sit here and judge him and tell you that he's going to fail. I don't know if he's going to succeed. But I do think Belichick's history with young coaches, guys that he's brought up and developed, for the most part, it's worked out really well. Brian Flores, another name. So I think we should give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's what Kraft's doing. Kraft is saying, look, you've been at this for 40 years. You've been with us for over 20. You've won 6 Super Bowls. You've been to a bunch of them. And, when you look at the young guys that you've brought up and how you developed some of this talent in the coaching staff, you deserve the benefit of the doubt. And if this thing blows up and it's a disaster because Joe Judge doesn't know what he's doing as a QB's coach, because Matt Patricia is a mess with the offensive line, because Nick Caley can't find his ass with his, 2 hands and a flashlight calling plays, then I'm going to step in. So I've got no problem with that. Let's look at the Belichick part of this, because, of course, Belichick spoke with the media before Kraft did. And, he spoke on free agency. He spoke on the staff. He spoke on Matt Groh. Your thoughts on what Bill had to say to the media when you guys all met with him?
Yeah, I thought it was typical Bill. I mean, low on, he was asked a lot of specific questions, the right questions that needed to be asked, and he just didn't want to answer them for whatever reason. I mean, I don't understand. The players are going to start being back in the building in a couple weeks, and they're going to know who they're coached by. I don't know why we can't know. And, I thought that Bill, and I agree with Bill. He talked about, we asked about Joe Judge and Matt Patricia, and, Bill's right. And I've made this point before. Say what you want about, maybe you don't like Patricia or Judge for whatever reason, the quotes that they've given as head coaches, or, the way that they look, the way they conduct themselves. Look, the guys are good football coaches, and Bill said that, and I agree with that. And, not having experience in a certain aspect of the game, is it a huge deal? No. I mean, look, everybody reveres Dante Scarnecchia for the work that he did as offensive line coach here forever. But Dante Scarnecchia coached another position before he coached the offensive line. And, let's just use Matt Patricia for an example. I know Dante Scarnecchia was named offensive line coach, and I forget if it was, I don't think it was Belichick. I think it might have been somebody before that. Yeah, it might have been Belichick. I'd have to go back and look. But the first thing Dante Scarnecchia did when he knew he was going to be coaching offensive line and switching, I think, from special teams to offensive line is he sought out some of the best offensive line coaches in the business out in Cincinnati. Jeff McNally, who was a longtime Bengals offensive line coach, a couple other guys. And he, got in his car and he drove out there and they talked on the whiteboard for like 3 days and talked off. And that's actually how the coaches of offensive line clinic that I go to every few years out in Cincinnati, that's how it was born. And, Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, I'm sure, are doing the exact same thing. I'm sure they're spending time studying up and you have the ability to do that. And so I'm not, overly alarmed. I mean, I will say that the NFL at large, Matt Patricia being everywhere with Belichick. I mean, he was at the league meetings, and assistant coaches are never at the league meetings. I don't think Josh McDaniels ever went. And he's there with him all over the place. Everywhere he goes, there's Matt Patricia. And it's just, it's odd, but, I think that Bill had a plan this offseason. A couple other tidbits of information I was able to glean that people have been asking about, we've been asking about. Their lack of spending this offseason. A lot of people want to assume that it's, they spent a lot last offseason, so the checkbook's not open. That's not the case. Like we've talked about, 2 years ago, the Cam Newton year, they cut expenses and they only spent like $150 million. So they saved money that year. A lot of it was rolled over into 21. They had the ability to do some things. Belichick has decided not to do that. They also have the ability to push cap into future years, like we've seen a lot of teams, like the Rams, to load up. The Patriots, it was made plain to me that the Patriots have done that in the past. They're still willing to do it. They just haven't decided to do that. Now, why? I do think that Belichick thinks that he has guys, and he talked about it, that he has guys who they think are going to take a step forward this offseason, whether it's Josh Uche,
right.
Kyle Duggar becomes better, some of their young, maybe some of the younger cornerbacks, Christian Barmore, guys like that. And also on offense, Nelson Aguilar, Jonnu Smith being the second year in the offense, changing a little bit what Jonnu does. I don't know if that solves the problem. That's a debate for a later date. But I think that Bill looks at all these things and he feels comfortable. And I think they are going to be active, Nick, and I think you would agree. There's a lot of players that are still decent players that are still out there, and they're sort of waiting for the price to drop. At some point, those guys are going to have to take a job. And while the Patriots might not be the lure that they once were, they are going to be able to say, hey, you have a chance to play a lot here, on a one-year deal and do what you want. And we've seen that in the past. Once the draft happens, then other people are going to be cut loose. And there's going to be more people available. And I know, what's his name? Scott Pioli talked about this, even though, I do think he's a little, fair-skied about the Patriots and where they are. And he, more than anybody, believes in Bill and thinks there's a plan and they're going to do it. But yes, I still think, and they have tons of roster spots still available that they have. I think they're going to be active in the third wave of free agency. It's not going to be crazy. There's probably going to be a lot more guys coming off of ACL tears, which seems like Belichick seems to be in love with currently, that they're going to, sort of wait and see. But I do think they're going to add more people. And I think Bill's comfortable where they are, in that the Patriots will be able to compete this year. And, that's sort of like my main takeaway from what Bill had to say.
So a couple of things to unpack. First of all, the coaching staff stuff. I just want to talk about for a minute, the history of some of these guys that get trashed on. And again, I'm not telling you that they would have succeeded if they were in other places. I'm not telling you that Matt Patricia was going to be a great head coach. Don't think I'm sitting here drinking the Kool-Aid, blah, 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 blah. Don't fall into the Felger traps. But let's look at this. Joe Judge was with the Giants. The Giants have a great history, a great tradition. And they also had a suck-ass GM, Dave Gettleman, who absolutely drove that organization into the ground. He was awful. If you look at his decision-making, if you look at his draft picks, if you look at his salary cap management, that dude was as bad as you could be. He stunk. And I don't know if any coach would have been able to win with Dave Gettleman's work in New York. Detroit has lost forever. Jim Caldwell is like basically the only guy in the past 20 years that's won, above 500 with that group, and they let him go. So, and you can think of Caldwell what you want. I don't think he's a great coach, but he's really the only guy that's won there. Mm-hmm. So when you start to look at some of these, again, McDaniels, 32 years old, given way too much, way too young. They let him call the shots. It was ridiculous. So I think, to just kind of write some of these guys off, because I do think fans fall into that, right? Like, oh, Joe Judge, he went to New York and it was an embarrassment. Well, how much of that was on Joe? How much of that was on Gettleman and everything else? Matt Patricia in Detroit, same thing. As far as free agency, I couldn't agree with you more. I honestly look at who has been signed, and there's like, three guys that I sat back and said, oh, that would have been a nice pickup for the Patriots. Like, there's legitimately 3 or 4 guys, like Allen Robinson, maybe Bobby Wagner, if you think he would have been able to change scheme, but he was never coming to New England. Bobby Wagner is from LA. He's going to go play in his home city. He wanted to stay in the NFC West. He got money from the Rams. So when you start to look at the guys that have actually gone, how many of them did you think the Patriots going to be in on or should have been in on? And when you look at the remaining free agents, there's a bunch of guys. I mean, if you and I went through the list that we went through a couple of weeks ago, the vast majority of those cats are still available. Like, go to NFL.com right now, Greg. Best free agents available. Tyrann Mathieu, still available. He was their 6th best free agent going into the offseason. Odell Beckham Jr. was their 11th best free agent. And you could sit there and squabble with the rankings, but you get my point. Beckham, 11, he's still available. Gilmore, 12, still available. Dwayne Brown, 14, still available. Jadeveon Clowney, still available. Calais Campbell, Melvin Ingram, Gronk, Jarvis Landry, Jerry Hughes, Akeem Hicks, Trey Flowers. All of these guys were in their top 50 of free agency. There's a lot of dudes that are still out there that I think could fit with this football team. So I'm not freaking out. Free agency, honestly, doing a show Monday through Friday every day out here in Sacramento, the first 6 days, the first wave, as we call it, was just huge and crazy and nuts. And then you had a couple of good, bigger signings for the second wave. But really the last 10 days or so, there hasn't been a bunch done. So I think the entire league, people are getting on Belichick. Would you agree with this, Greg, or not? It seems to me that most of the league is playing this like Belichick. Most of the league, I believe, thinks that this market is a little too high right now. Teams that are desperate, like the Jacksonville Jaguars, are jumping in and overpaying guys. And I think the majority of the league is laying back and waiting for these dudes that are still available to realize you ain't getting the money you thought you were going to get.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think that there are guys, and a lot of those guys on the list that you mentioned, probably for whatever reason aren't going to be Patriots, mostly because, those are guys who are like, I've already made my bank. I'm only playing for a certain amount, like Matthew, Gilmore, Brown. Those are guys that have been around. They're like, I'm not getting off my couch for $5 million a year. So they're going to wait. But I do agree with you. And I think that the Patriots are sitting back. One thing I wanted to say about that real quick about, there's a lot of fans who want to believe, and it could be true. They want to believe, oh, well, they're sitting out this year because they're going to have $100 million in cap space next year. That is true. They will. But what you also have to understand is that the Patriots are going to have a lot of company next year with teams. I think there's 15 teams with over $70 million in cap space. And the Patriots, the only time they really had a free agent bonanza was last year when they had an advantage. They were one of the few teams that had cap space during the COVID year. It just happened to work out that way. And if you think they're just going to buy up all these people, there's going to be a bidding war next year. When the Patriots don't get into bidding wars, they're going to go to guys early that they want, that they target, what they did last year, and said, this is what we're offering you, take it or leave it. And if you don't, we're moving on to, the next guys on our list. And so I understand that people want to believe, all right, well, they're doing this and next year and that. I just wouldn't bank on that. I do think that, like you said, Belichick wants to win. I think he believes he can win, even though we look at it and we're just like, I don't know how they're going to compete. It's going to be tough, and it is. But, I do think they're looking for second year in the system leaps from a lot of guys, and I'm not here to say that is not going to happen because I have faith. I liked the Nelson Aguilar signing. I liked Jonnu Smith. I like Josh Uche, guys of that ilk, and, we'll have to see whether it pays off.
Yeah, and I think Kendrick Bourne had a really good first year, and if he can build off of that, I think that dude is a legitimate weapon,
yeah.
and I think he can have a really good season. And Ramondre Stevenson with a year under his belt, I do think there is more to tap from this current roster than people give it credit for. One last thing before we move on to some other stuff, I just want to mention Belichick talking about Matt Groh, and it's interesting. We talked about Groh getting the gig over Elliott Wolf. And at first, I don't know if it made sense to you. You questioned it a little bit. And to me, it was a little weird. But now when you pull back from 30,000 feet, I think it makes more sense. Like, Matt Groh is college guy, college football dude, understands the draft better than I think anybody in that building.
Yep.
Elliott Wolf is more the NFL guy, the NFL personnel guy. And so if you're Belichick, you say to yourself, well, me and Elliott can handle kind of the NFL personnel side of this. Like, I've got that in a headlock. And you kind of marry that stuff with, you marry that with the thoughts of Kraft and what he said last year and again this year about the draft and how they stunk at drafting. And when you pull back from 30,000 feet, it makes more sense, that Belichick would tab the guy who was the draft guy, the college football guy, and say, okay, we're building this team through the draft. Last year, of course, they crushed, they went after it in free agency, as we've talked about. But we had a great draft last year with Groh in a position in the hierarchy. If we have another killer draft this year, that's 2 years, we build momentum, and let's put the guy that is better at that side of the job than me and Elliott. Let's let him run this thing here, because this offseason is going to be more focused on the draft. And moving forward is going to be more focused on the draft. And we're not going to be spending, as you said, hundreds of millions of dollars in off seasons every offseason. So it actually makes more sense to me when I think about it and when I hear Kraft talk about it, that they took the guy who had the college football draft background and made him the dude instead of the guy who had the NFL personnel background, because I think Belichick feels pretty confident that as far as NFL talent, kind of knows what he's doing, and Elliott can help him with that stuff. Does it make sense to you, Greg?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's a line of thinking that Belichick promoted Groh instead of Elliott Wolf because Wolf had two more GM, interviews this past offseason. I think it was Minnesota and Chicago, and was a finalist for both. And Belichick is sick of hemorrhaging people just sick of hemorrhaging people. And if I do Elliott Wolf, then, he's going to be gone in a year and that sort of thing. I will say this, and I asked a lot of questions about Groh and, along with Patricia and Judge and things like that. And I got to say, and this is, yes, Belichick was very, he praised Matt Groh a lot on the record. From talking to people off the record at the league meetings, there's a tremendous belief in Matt Groh and what he can do, his smarts, his ability, and also I was surprised to learn people think that he will be will speak up to Belichick when it comes to what they're doing. I also think you talked about the pro side, not only Belichick, Groh, Matt Patricia does a lot of stuff on there, and also Joe Judge as head coach has a lot of pro background. Just like Belichick is good at identifying people in the NFL, I think those guys feel more comfortable there. Steve Cargile, let's not forget him. He runs the pro personnel side. I think he's very good. I think that Cameron Williams, the young kid that they promoted to director of college scouting, I think is a star in the making on that side of the ball. I will say, back to my point, people think Matt Groh is the cat's meow. I mean, they really do. I mean, I have no idea. So I'm going with what a lot of smart people think. I will tell you, now in the distance, people are not exactly favorable to Nick Caserio and the job that he did, and how sort of he did not have the voice to counter Bill Belichick. Dave Ziegler did a much better job at that. There's more confidence in Matt Groh, and also just his overall talent in scouting the college. And I think that there's a lot of people in that building who believe in Matt Groh and think he's going to do a really good job.
Tom Brady won again, Greg. Bruce Arians goes to the front office. But don't worry, Tom Brady was in the front row of his press conference, so that means they got together and they were great friends, according to some in the media. Your thoughts on, Brady and what people were saying about Brady at the meetings and this Arians move, which obviously, a month before the draft, to me, is pretty late for your head coach to all of a sudden go to the front office. Yeah,
look, 2 weeks after Tom Brady unretires, Bruce Arians all of a sudden retires. And, they could say whatever on the timing. And there are certainly people out there putting an Arians spin on this. But look, let's call it what it was. This was orchestrated by Tom Brady. This was, or at least he knew it was coming. And that's why he decided to come back. And, to me, with that, even before this happened, first of all, Bruce Arians left the league meetings for a personal reason, and didn't even finish out. That was odd. I heard at the league meeting, somebody told me, and they would know, that first of all, Tom Brady still has no cares for Bill Belichick, the person, but his time in Tampa has enhanced his respect for Bill as a football coach and what everything that he does and the position that he put Tom in. And that Tom, let's just say Tom does not feel the same way about Bruce Arians. The stuff that we have been talking about, we talked about this when he retired. I said, I don't know. I don't believe that he's retired. He's still on top. I think that he's disgruntled with Arians and the situation there, and he's trying to orchestrate things. I think Tom Brady absolutely did that. I don't think that he would have come back if he knew Bruce Arians was going to be the coach this coming season. And so all of a sudden he comes back, and 2 weeks later, Bruce Arians is gone. That is not a coincidence. It's not.
It's clear as day. It's clear as day. And I know Bruce Arians, and he curses, and the media loves him because he's just a chuckle cigar smoking, bourbon, whatever, drinking, hell raising. Oh, hell yeah, on WrestleMania weekend, and everybody loves the guy. And so you're going to get this faction of media, and I don't need to name names. You can figure it out rather quickly the way they handle this Bruce Arians thing. You are going to get Arians buddies. You're going to get the people that, will defend him and say, no, he didn't lose a battle. This was his decision the entire way. Go through the chain of events. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. Brady retires, quote unquote. And look, he got me. He hoodwinked me. I sat on my show and looked like a moron because I went and pontificated about how, he left 1 year left on his contract because he didn't want to be a distraction during his final year and blah, 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 blah. And, Brady is the ultimate team guy. And I think, some of that is still true, but we all know what happened here. Like, he didn't want to play for Bruce anymore. He didn't know if he was going to be able to win the tug of war. So he went the retirement angle to put their feet to the fire. Then all of a sudden, rather quickly, he's leaving the door open like a few days later with Jim Gray. And then, all the stuff comes out about the Niners and, he might not want to be retired and blah. And he was putting, as the wind chimes behind me sound beautiful. He was, he's putting the feet to the fire is what he was doing. He was putting the Bucs' feet to the fire and saying, look, okay, you want to play hardball with me. You want to draw the line in the sand. You're not going to trade me. So I'm going to retire. And the only way you get me back, unless you want Kyle Trask or some other, ham and egger to be the quarterback, the only way you get me back is if you allow me to do things my way and you let me run this offense and you get Bruce out of my way because I can't deal with it anymore. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he shows up at the soccer match and speaks to the Glazers, and the very next day he unretires right before free agency. and all these guys come back. And then, as you said, 2 weeks later, Bruce Arians just randomly says, oh, I'm going to go to the front office. And he's having this press conference, and Arians says, oh, the title. He doesn't even know what he's doing. He literally admitted, I don't know what this role is. So you think 2 weeks before, a month before the draft, 2 weeks after Brady says I'm coming back, it doesn't make any sense. Todd Bowles is now the head coach. He's also going to call the defensive plays. None of it makes sense. Sometimes, what is it? Occam's razor, as Adam Jones would always say when we used to do a show together. Sometimes the easiest explanation is the explanation, right? The most simplest form. It's obvious. Brady wanted him out. He lost the power struggle. Bruce Arians after the season said nothing about, retiring or going to the front office. Everything he said was, we want to run this thing back, and we want Brady back, and we want to win. And so give me a break. We all know what was going on. We all know what happened there. They're even putting him in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers like Ring of Honor, which I think is hey, thanks, Bruce, for stepping aside and not causing issues, allowing us to put the bullet in your head, going out, quietly and doing it the way you did. We'll put you in the Ring of Honor. You can get this front office gig. We'll pay you a couple $1 million so you can sit in a suite on Sundays with your feet up and you drink and you smoke your cigars and hang out. Like that's what happened. A lot of stuff is said at the meetings, Greg, that you were just at down in Florida. I want to know what the craziest thing you heard at the meetings was.
So I don't know what to make of this, but it was somebody who is very smart, very plugged in, told me this. I asked about, I was asking about Bill O'Brien, asking around about him. Why isn't he with the Patriots? It makes the most sense. I mean, it's just be like Josh McDaniels, coming back after Denver and St. Louis. And I was told that there's a belief that Bill O'Brien is in position to be the next Alabama coach, and that's why he's still there. I have no clue if that's true. I'm just passing along what I heard, and yeah.
Well, it sounds crazy, but it makes sense, right? Like if you were Bill O'Brien and you had some desire to go back into the NFL and you thought, going back to New England and being the offensive coordinator in New England, we know that almost every single hire now in the league is offensive coordinator positions being moved up, right? I mean, you just look around. The Sean McVay coaching tree is out of control. They're going to start getting guys that like clean the toilets in LA and put them in like big spots around the league because it's Sean McVay. But when you look at it, why would Bill O'Brien turn down the chance of being the New England offensive coordinator with Mac Jones and get back in the league? One of the only things that would make sense is that he knows he has the inside track on Alabama, and Saban, of course, he's about 70, and maybe he's been told by Saban that, hey, a couple of years from now, I'm going to be out ski, and look.
And why wouldn't you, if you're Alabama and you're Nick Saban? Why wouldn't you want to stay within the Belichick family and just continue on instead of like plucking hot shot with, new system and all that? This is proven. It works. Bill O'Brien has been successful on the college level at Penn State. He knows how to operate the system. Like, I don't know when Nick Saban's going to, he's 70 years old, but the guy's he's always been in phenomenal shape. He's smart as hell. He'll coach as long as he wants to, but it could get to the point where he hangs it up, and I think Bill O'Brien would be sort of like the perfect guy to continue on. If you're Alabama, you're like, all right, well, I just want to continue doing what we're doing, and that's sort of the Belichick system.
Yeah, and let's not get it twisted. Whoever is going to be the next head coach of Alabama is going to be cherry-picked by Nick Saban. Like, Saban's going to have that call. Whoever Saban says is the next guy is going to be no one's going to question Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa. He's going to walk up and say, Bill O'Brien's the dude, and that's what's going to be done. Simple, easy. Let's get to the BostonSportsJournal.com member question of the day. Check them out at BSJ, $39.99 on the annual plan. Not only do you get top-notch analysis of all the Boston pro sports, but if you're a Patriots junkie, and if you're listening to this podcast, you are, unless you just love Greg and I, then a membership at BSJ gives you access to a ton of video analysis that Greg does on the coach's film and direct access to this man and weekly chats. This question is from Brian. No last name, just Brian. Does signing Jabrill Peppers affect getting a comp pick for J.C. Jackson, or was he a no comp street free agent? That's the first question. I have a follow-up, but let's address the first question, Greg.
First question is, he was an unrestricted free agent. It does not affect J.C. Jackson. I don't even think it affects. He's getting paid so little, and you also have to remember that playing time the following year also factors into the equation, and so no, it doesn't. It doesn't affect anything. I think the Patriots, and by the way, the timing, just to let people know. It's the Monday after the draft. Once the Monday after the draft is over, now you can sign any free agent you want, and they don't factor into the compensatory pick formula.
All right, follow-up question, and this is, I think, what more people want to hear about anyway. Brian asks, am I too optimistic to think that if Peppers is healthy, he's the one addition that could make a real difference in 2022?
It's an interesting question. I said, look, I'll start here. And the big caveat is if he's healthy. I'll say this about Jabrill Peppers. He's a talented guy. He went in the first round by the Browns. He was one of Joe Judge's favorite players with the Giants. That tells me he's coachable. He's always been known as a leader. He could play multiple positions. I was just looking up his size. It says he's 5'11", 215. That was probably coming out of college. He's a guy who, coming out of college, people weren't really sure where he was going to play. Is he a safety? Is he a linebacker? I think, look, number one, he has to get healthy. He tore his ACL in week 6 last year. Let's be realistic about what he's going to do. I would not be surprised, and I'm sure there's reports that say, he's going to be ready for camp. I don't really believe that. I think that he's more of a candidate to start the season on the PUP list. You pretty much got to go a full season or a full year, and that would bring him about to the midpoint of the season. I do think he has the ability. He's good backup in case there is an injury at safety, Adrian Phillips or Kyle Duggar especially. But I do think ultimately, he slots in as a sub package linebacker for this team, and gives them the ability to be a lot more versatile. He can help cover guys out of the backfield, tight ends, things like that. Stick his nose in the run game. Yes, healthy, and it's a big if. Yes, Jabrill Peppers can help this team. I just wouldn't, bank on anything. He's another tool in the tool chest, and we'll have to see how things play out.
I like it a lot. I do like this signing a lot. If he's healthy, it's a caveat. If he's healthy, and ACLs, look, I don't want to write off ACLs, but we know ACL injuries are not as crushing as they were 5-10 years ago. You can come back 6 to 9 months later and feel pretty good. You're not going to look like the same guy immediately, right? But you never know how the human body is going to react. Everybody is different. Generally speaking, ACLs are not as bad as they were a decade ago. But the reason why I like this signing, a couple of things, he brings so much versatility. He can cover backs out of the backfield, as you mentioned. You're not going to get crushed by wheel routes if Pepper's out there, which is great. And I think Mack Wilson has that kind of same ability as well. He can cover tight ends, as you mentioned. He can also cover some wide receivers. And I think, when you look at trying to improve the athleticism of this football team, he does that. He is an outstanding, again, if the ACL heals fine and all that, he's an outstanding athlete. Nobody would question his athleticism. And he also is a really, he's got a high ceiling as a punt returner, which, without Gunnar Olszewski, I wouldn't be surprised if Peppers plays some special teams and is at least in part your punt returner. I got a bigger question for you, and we just got a couple minutes left here. I know we've gone long, but I couldn't care less. This is fun conversation. When I look at this secondary and I look at what the Patriots are doing, we always talked about the amoeba kind of front seven and how they would shuffle guys in the front seven and move guys around on the. Is this just a crazy theory of mine outside the box, Nick? Settle down a little bit.
Hit me with it.
But are we seeing a little bit of an amoeba kind of style in the second and third levels now, where you are putting a bunch of pieces that can move around, and you never really know when you're the offense. Everything right now in the NFL is pre-snap movement, right? Misdirection. is Belichick setting this team up to be able to just almost like in basketball terms, switch, like the Celtics switch everybody? Is Belichick setting this up where he just goes, look, we got a couple of boundary cornerbacks who can do a decent job. They're not great, but if Malcolm Butler looks like he did in 20, he's fine. Jalen Mills is a 2, he's fine. But we're going to get a bunch of pieces. We've got Peppers, we've got McCourty, we've got Duggar, we've got Mills, we've got these guys that can play. Phillips is another one. Guys that can play in different spots. They can pick up a dude on the boundary. They can pick up a slot. They can pick up a tight end. They can pick up a running back. And maybe the idea of this is to play a little bit more zone coverage, but to be able to change on the fly with different versatile pieces versus saying J.C. Jackson 1, Jalen Mills 2, or 2 safeties, and more or less have like an amoeba-like second and third level, and you can throw Mac Wilson in there as well. Am I crazy for thinking that's a possible idea that Belichick has right now?
Boy, somebody's brain's been overheating this offseason with the Patriots' lack of activity. Look, I'm not gonna shoot that down, Nick. I think what you're seeing is the Patriots at the base, they realized that they had a humongous speed deficiency last year, and they're willing to get a little bit smaller and faster. That's what I see. I do think that they're going to need to be able to – you can do that, but you got to be able to defend the run first better than they did last season. To me, that's why if I'm the Patriots, I'm figuring out a way to get a guy like Jordan Davis from Georgia, and you put him next to Barmore. You basically put him in the middle of the line. Your run defense improves, and he can be the sort of the solo guy in the middle and even in sub. And don't really worry about that. But they're also going to have to. They're going to have to be a better. They're going to have to get more pass rush. We'll see. Will they get a guy like Trey Flowers that one of the guys that we said, is still sort of out there. They're going to have to be better with the pass rush. They're still going to have to cover, but I do think right now the only thing I'm willing to say is they're trying to get smaller and quicker, but that's a tight window to go. We've seen other defenses like that. Like I would say the Cardinals defense has been like that, where they've been a lot, but they also had like Chandler Jones and other guys, Calais Campbell getting pressure or stuffing the run. So that's been successful. For the Patriots, the way they like to play, to go this route, to me, it's very interesting, and we'll have to see what other pieces they add to sort of make that a reality come the season.
Outside of the draft, 3 guys I'd be looking at. You mentioned a couple of them, but Calais Campbell is still out there.
Yep.
Lakeem Hicks is still out there.
Yep.
And Trey Flowers is still out there. If you could get 2 of those 3 guys, I feel pretty good about that defensive front. If you can get 2 of those, 3 of those guys. And if you get one of them, if you get Flowers, but you draft a Wyatt or a Davis, as you mentioned, Greg, then, you can kind of see this thing be put together a little bit. He is Greg Bedard. I am Nick Cattles. Therefore, this podcast is called the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles. Greg, it's been fun. Have a good weekend. Enjoy yourself. Be healthy. Be good. And we'll do this all again next week. Sound good?
Sound good. Thanks, buddy.